back to Speaking with Confidence, the podcast that helps you build the soft skills that lead to real results. Communication, storytelling, public speaking, and showing up with confidence in every conversation that counts. I'm Tim Newman, a recovering college professor turned communication coach, and I'm thrilled to guide you on a journey to becoming a powerful communicator. Today's guest is Varuschka Nagesar. Varuschka is an empowerment executive coach who brings 15 years of corporate experience as a lawyer and commercial leader into her work, helping high-achieving women step into authentic leadership. After leading multi-million-dollar negotiations and navigating complex transformations at global companies, she pivoted her career to focus on what truly drives performance: self-belief, purpose, and presence. Today, she guides women through career transitions, leadership challenges, and personal reinvention, helping them move beyond titles to embody their full influence. Her coaching philosophy is rooted in authenticity and transformation, blending corporate insights with deep personal development. Varuschka is passionate about helping women reclaim their power, align with their purpose, and build the confidence to lead with impact in both work and life. Varuschka, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for having me on today.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I mean, you come from a really diverse background with some really interesting stories. But let's start with, the cultural differences. So, you've worked with across the world, from South Africa to UK and US companies, and how those cultural differences, really shape the way you communicate and build trust within teams.
True. It's an interesting question, especially because when you say I have a very diverse background, it's a very diverse background.
Yeah.
So having grown up and studied and was brought up in South Africa with its own diversity and its own sort of cultural challenges and nuances, for example, being post-apartheid, meant that I was more akin to looking at those racial aspects and those racial differences, aside from just what language someone spoke, which religion they came from, etc. So that was already something that was heightened in my knowledge and being and just general awareness and communication, because now we have 11 official languages in South Africa, most of which I can't speak, but I do speak English and Afrikaans. And so having lived there and then worked there for many years before I moved to the UK, I ended up working in global companies, which were American companies, albeit I worked based in the UK, but I worked across the European continent. And some of it was Middle East and Africa, but it was still predominantly Europe. And so again, I am exposed to people who are of different countries, different continents, different languages, different religions as well. But in general, I think, to answer your question about business and being in different types of teams and then the cultural differences, is really, it starts, I think, with language. Because one of my earliest experiences when I was working in South Africa is when I started to work with Europeans that didn't have English as their first language. And so early on in my career, I would think, oh, that's really odd. I'm not really sure what that person is trying to express because their English wasn't as great. But as I progressed through my career, I learned to understand that actually I admire them because they are trying to do business in a language that's not their mother tongue. It's their second or third language, and they're still managing to do business and express themselves. And so understanding where people are coming from, not just physically and location, but what kind of challenges they might have and what could present a barrier, which could very well be language. Sometimes it's also culture, the choice of phrases or just analogies that we may use, and take it for granted that, oh, I might say that cost me 10 quid. When I first moved to the UK, I was like, what's a quid? It's actually just a pound.
Right.
Versus $1. But it's those little nuanced things that I'd come to notice and pick up and be aware of, that, if you're in a particular environment, if I'm in a different office versus if I'm speaking to someone virtually, there's nuanced things you sort of pick up and go with because of the differences in just the actual location and the people and their practices.
Yeah. So what about body language? Now smiling and facial expressions, I think is universal, but there are other body languages that maybe aren't. What kind of challenges or similarities did you see it from that perspective?
I think that's a really interesting one because our body language tends to give a lot away, whether we
Hmm.
intend to or we don't. So sometimes it's almost irrelevant what language we speak, because
Hmm.
if we're upset, or like you said, smiling is quite universal. If
Right,
we're happy or we're pleased, you could almost tell, oh, that smile, which is a big toothy grin, it's hard to say that that person's not happy about what they just had, as
right,
opposed to a smirk or an upset face or an angry face. I think facial expressions are one thing, but when you are in a room with someone, you tend to also feel what they are expressing sometimes, if that makes sense. Because
yeah,
sometimes you can sense the tension and the frustration, even if someone's body language is not as tight, but they start to close up.
right,
As
hmm,
opposed to if I'm feeling cold, I might do this in an office where the air conditioner is on.
right,
Or if I'm listening very carefully and I'm like, but I don't really like what this person is saying,
hmm,
So it's easier to pick it up if you're in a room versus if you're having a conversation virtually. Sometimes
right,
the quality of the picture is not great. So I can't really tell what that person is feeling, thinking, or saying. Or there might be someone in the background that's trying to get their attention. So I've lost their focus.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's important to be able to ferret those things out, right? But you have to know one. You have to know who you're dealing with, and that's from the cultural perspective, understanding really where they come from, and what those body languages actually mean, for their culture as well. Um, and I was listening to a speaker the other day, and he was also talking about diversity, and we a lot of times, like you said, we focus a lot on racial diversity. But there's cultural diversity, there's diversity between genders, but there's also the whole idea of age diversity. And we're in a time right now where we've got 5 different generations of workers working together for the first time in history. So you've really got to be able to work with people of all ages, right? From the early
True.
20s to the 70s, and that's also to me kind of a difficult navigation. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I have so many examples of that. Only because across the span of my career, because when I started out, often I would be the only woman in the room
Hmm.
or the only woman of color in the room, sometimes the youngest person in the room. And so when you're starting out and you haven't built the confidence that
Hmm.
comes from practicing and knowing more and just being in the room more often, it's different because then you tend to not want to speak up as
Hmm.
much, or you're very careful about what you're saying. When you gain the confidence, it's a little different because then oh, I've got to lean in and I've really got to make my point because I know that it has to be made now and I need these people to listen to me. But I'm also conscious of I might be the youngest person or the only woman, or it might just be culturally I have to watch how I'm going to position this because coming across too aggressively might not work in my favor.
Right.
But speaking about the different generations, I think I had a challenging experience when I worked in an office in central London, where I was working with pretty much a much older generation and then slightly younger generation. So I felt a little in between, and I felt that I didn't have too many people that understood me and where I was coming from,
Hmm.
and sort of I couldn't relate to anyone because there wasn't anyone in my generation or thought like me, right? Also
Right.
because I was coming from a different place. I have a very diverse background, but also when you have a different open mind and perspective, it also makes you stand out, which
Yes.
often can work for you, but it can also work against you.
Hmm.
And so I struggled with that a lot because I had gotten to a point in my career where I was so used to voicing my opinion or sharing it in a certain way and adapting to the people I was dealing with, because you learn the soft skills of knowing who you're addressing,
Right.
what kind of information they like. Are they a driver? Are they an analytic? That type of thing. And then you get into a stage where you're like, oh, okay, so now we got a technology gap as well. I like to not take printed out presentations to a meeting. I'll use my laptop to do it.
Right.
Or I might just record something on a recording device and then go back and look at it. So, and that didn't really sit well, or my ways of doing things. And I really had to adapt to that, deciding, okay, whilst it's not great for me and the way I work, will this bridge the gap between us? Yes, then I'll do it. But it was challenging.
It really is challenging, and I like what you said. You have to be careful with how you say something and how it comes across, and I think that's true, really, for anybody in any real situation, because you can be right, but if you go about it wrong, you're wrong, even if you're right.
Yes.
And that's a tough thing for especially the younger generation to understand.
Yes. For lack of a better word, it could be politics. It could be diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
It could just be managing people.
Yes.
Depending on the scenario and the circumstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that every scenario does require a sensitivity. So
Yes.
some form of diplomacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, like you said, it's how you say it, only because you don't want someone to interpret it incorrectly. I mean, as much as we try, it does happen.
Right.
But if you go at it with good intent, chances are they'll give you the room to explain yourself.
Right.
But if not, then it can go quite wrong.
Yeah, and that could lead to long-term implications as well. It could not just whatever situation or that you're dealing with at that moment, that could set things back and create a problem long term.
Absolutely. And I've had some experiences of that where it's created tension just by not recognizing quickly what the other person needed or what the challenge was. And sometimes it wasn't really about communication. It was more about managing egos or managing just a sensitive situation, which I may or may not have had the history on.
Right.
So, and it happens, it happens with personal relationships. It happens in business relationships. It depends, but it requires both people to want to communicate, to sort of unravel that misunderstanding or that miscommunication in order to bounce back from it. But to your point, sometimes you can really mess things up or burn a bridge.
Exactly. And I make light of it sometimes. Sometimes burning a bridge, I wouldn't say burning a bridge is ever good, but sometimes saying what needs to be said is also what needs to be said or done. And again, we read the room, fight the battle that you want to fight. Is that really the battle that you want to fight at that moment in time? And that's something again that I think you learn through experience. I mean, we can talk to the younger generations about this and tell them all the mistakes that we made, but sometimes they have to learn that the hard way themselves too.
True. I think we all need to make our own mistakes as much as, there's so much information out there. Every question you can think of, you probably find an answer, whether that's the right answer for you or whether it makes sense to you is what's important. Like if I think about all the cliches, as I have had my experiences and grow with life, I realize why some of those cliches actually are true or what they actually mean. But you don't know until you live it. I think you know what I mean.
I do. I know exactly what you mean. So
yeah. But you were mentioning the younger generation, and something came up for me, which is, I think it's really important for people to find their voice, right? And that's where the mistakes come in, because there'll be times where you don't want to speak up, and sometimes there's a kid in a class in the back of the classroom that knows the answer but is too afraid to put their hand up to say the answer. There's those people. And then there's the ones who always have something to say, whether it's valuable, whether it answers the question or not, they have something to say. But when you truly find your voice and have something valuable to say and know when to speak, that's when you sort of mastered the art of your own voice, which
Right.
obviously takes experience.
It does. But having the confidence to be able to do that too. And I think there are too many of the people that have something to say and it is valuable, and they for whatever reason they don't express it, right? Because and when I was teaching, I would tell the classes, if you have a question or if you have an opinion, you're probably not the only one in the room that has it. And those that learn how to share that or ask that question, those are the real leaders. Those are the people that are really going to get things done. So we're looking for leaders. Absolutely. Say what you have to say. Let it come out. And the only way you're going to get better at sharing that opinion or asking that question is by sharing that opinion or asking that question, right? You don't get better at driving by watching a driving movie, right? You get better at driving by driving. You don't get better at writing by not writing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing.
You have to get behind the wheel. That's what's important.
So let's go back to the only one thing real quick, because this is something that when we talk about diversity and we talk about different cultures and all kinds of diversity, how do you coach somebody when they are the only one in terms of expressing themselves? Because again, I think it's so important that's how if we don't express ourselves, if we don't ask a question, if we don't give our opinion, whatever, we're not living up to who we are. Because number one, we don't get hired for people to make fun of us. We get hired because we have knowledge, skills, the things that they're looking for to make a business or team or whatever it is better, right? So how do you coach people to pull that out of them?
Yeah. So when you say the only one, you mean they feel like they are standing alone?
Mm-hmm. It could be the only female, it could be the only person of color, it could be the only Gen Z, or it could be whatever.
Sure. Anyway, the answer would be the same, but I was just wondering if that's what you meant. And it's what you said just now. It's about being able to express what you have to say by being true to yourself. Keeping it to yourself is not going to help anyone. If that's what you were hired for and that's your expertise and you have an opinion, you should have the strength and the confidence to be able to say it. Granted, there are external factors that might get in the way of people doing that. If it's not a very conducive environment, or it's a difficult manager, or it's just a scenario where they have those types of challenges. But if we take away the external variables and the factors, and we just look at the individual, it's about coming back to their authenticity, right? And it's about understanding what drives them in terms of their values and who they are. Because once you start to believe in yourself and you're confident about what you know and what you have to say, then finding that voice to be able to express it is merely being yourself. There's no validation you need externally, or you just have to give yourself permission to do it. And there's no reason you shouldn't, right? But it's to work through that, to get to that point where they look at themselves and they realize, well, I'm only holding myself back. Why?
Yeah. And look, I've been there. I don't want to pretend like I haven't been there, because I've been there. But as I've gotten older, I kind of forget that sometimes, and I almost get incredulous. Why what's wrong with you? Just bring it out. Just tell us, you've got it. And,
Yeah.
but again,
Well,
I gotta pull
yeah.
back and remember that I was there, and they've got to figure some of those things out. We can coach them along, but ultimately
Yes.
they've got to be the ones to make that decision to put themselves out there.
Yeah. And that's why, having self empowerment and remembering who you are and how valuable your input is will allow them to sort of remember, re-engage, and have that confidence again to speak. Because whilst we might coach someone today and they're great for a couple of months or they're great for a year, there might be some trigger that comes along and then they take a step back. Why? Sometimes a limiting belief could come in and it's something really major. It's like, oh, I've been doing these little talks everywhere and now I've got this big stage of thousands of people. It's not 50 to 60 anymore. It's thousands of people. And then it's fear, and it's natural, and sometimes it's a good thing, but it shouldn't stop us in our tracks. So it's about coming back again and remembering the why and remembering the how, and despite the fear, doing it anyway.
Right. And if you think about it, we do lots of things with fear. It could be anything. It could be going on a first date. It could be going to the gym. It could be, I'm scared to death of heights, but when I was in the military, I was in the airborne unit, jumping out of planes. I mean, so we do things, you figure out whatever it is, and you just do, and you do it anyway. And the more you do it, the less that fear lessens. It never truly goes away. And like you said, maybe that's a good thing.
True. It's there to protect you.
Yes.
And so sometimes it stops us, but that's where people like us come in, because we're like, you can overcome that because it isn't a real threat.
Right.
So there isn't anything that you actually protecting yourself from a real attack or a real threat.
Right.
And so, that's how we can measure it up and be able to sort of work through it and carry that fear with us, albeit as a smaller pebble rather than a big heavy stone.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some more ideas of diversity, because your career is very, very diverse, and
Yes,
you've made a number of pivots.
I have.
You started off in the legal profession, and then
I'll help you out with that one.
Yeah.
So I started off studying law and qualified as a lawyer in South Africa. So I started working in technology whilst I was there. I've done the law clerking at the judiciary, the highest courts in South Africa, and then I went on to a law firm. And then I knew I didn't want to do the law firm typical partner route. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go and work in-house in corporates because I wanted to learn how to use law to help business and to help people, because it was really about helping people, some form of service. But one also has to have a life and make money. So I thought, well, that's interesting. If I'm not going to work in nonprofits, which I initially thought I was going to do, I decided I will go into corporate because, well, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, and they could do a lot of good. And so then I ended up working in a global company that was about technology and outsourcing and transformation, and was really interesting. And then I moved from that technology company into Google Cloud, which is very different from what I was previously doing subject matter wise. But from a legal perspective, business perspective, relationship management perspective, it was pretty much the same, all transferable skills. And then I went from Google Cloud to logistics, which is also very different and a little less sophisticated in terms of technology, and didn't move as fast as the tech industry. But I have had some vast experiences across continents and cultures, and I loved every bit of it because I found the diversity fed my need to learn more about people, to just learn in general, but to also learn what's common between us and what I could use as a bridge rather than as a barrier. Right. If that makes sense.
Right. Well, makes a ton of sense. And, again, I think the more experience you have, the more bridges you actually have to be able to connect and to be able to help people, depending on where they are and what they need, right? I mean, if you only stay in one lane your entire life, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. Just like there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with branching out. But if you only stay in one lane, you really are only helping one, or can only really help one subset of people in one particular area.
Mhm.
So, you know, but again, I think it comes back to the whole word diversity. The more diverse you are from a professional perspective, the more diverse your thinking is, the more diverse
Yes.
the number of people that you can help, or to even problem solve, to be able to help in a given
Yes.
situation.
Yes. And I think the diversity aspect is about, so business, a large part of it is people make decisions that are really actually emotional. I mean,
Mm.
they use the data, yes. They use the bottom line and the numbers, etc. Yes. But often enough, the reason why a deal goes well, goes wrong, gets stalled is because someone doesn't feel right about something, or it didn't sit well with them, or whatever it is. And it often becomes the solution is about the people who know each other and how to manage them. Even
Mm-hmm.
when I went into a negotiation room, and you have to know who the different players are, and
Yes.
and you have to know in your own team who can do what, because you got to play at each other's strengths, and you got to watch and read the room, because if a client is not responding to me very well, I need to be able to pivot and rely on my colleague or whoever's with me to be able to cover that point, knowing full well that I know it, but if
Right.
I'm going to say it, it's not going to land really well. So
Right.
instead of, taking offense and getting my ego in the way, I was like, okay, we do it the other way around, and vice versa. I would often see when I was in a room full of people where they'd be talking about the problem, but because they were coming from different roles. So a legal person would speak in a certain way. A person who is delivering the project would speak in a slightly different way, and the salesperson would speak in a slightly different language because they had different objectives and end results. Everybody wanted to sign the deal and do the project, but everyone had a different sort of vantage point and end of line that they were focusing on at that point in time. And I could see that. So I knew how to speak each person's language in order to convince them
Yeah.
if there was a particular point that we needed to work through. And the reason why I say this is because you can see that it's hard to sometimes get someone to understand your viewpoint if you're not taking it in from their perspective. Because if I just went, you can't do that because the law says you can't do that, they're like, now you an obstacle to my deal.
I'll figure
But
out
if
a way
I
around
say,
it, right?
yeah, but if I say, well, there's a solution because the law won't allow us to do this, but here's a solution and we need to work around it. So you're already presenting a solution. You're not telling them
Mm.
you can't do that. You're not shooting their idea down, but you're coming up with some alternative ideas because you're saying, well, I want to protect your deal. I don't want you to do that because that's not going to work for you. So that's not a great idea. And again, it's about caring for them and what they need and what they want, but it's about analyzing the people, feeling what's happening in the room. And if someone's gotten up on the wrong side of the bed, well, that's a different story altogether.
Right.
But again, you got to be able to sort of pivot and do those things, because sometimes it's just the circumstance. I know there was a time where I was sitting in a room in Finland, and I don't speak Finnish, so they were forced to do the negotiations in English. And when myself and a colleague walked into the room, we could see that they were unhappy about it. They were unhappy that they had to deal with two people who are not Finnish, and that they were forced to speak English instead of Finnish. So we were already on the back foot. That
Right.
was a tough negotiation.
Yeah, I'm sure. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, you know, I love that people in Europe travel as much as they do, because here in the United States, I mean, even, let's just say, so I live in South Carolina. It's southeastern, on the southeast coast of the United States. Let's just say I were to even go up to Washington, which is uh, northwest coast of the United States. We're
Mm-hmm.
still speaking the same language. we may
It's
have a few little differences here or there, but when you could, you're in UK, go to Ireland,
mm,
go to France, go to Finland. I mean, and you're there in a couple of hours. It's not like you're traveling, forever, and you have that opportunity, and a lot of people do that there. They just,
yes.
we're going to go away for the weekend. We're going to Paris. Okay, great. We're going to Madrid, whatever it is, right? And
Mhm.
okay, so weekends for us, I don't know, may go to Orlando. Okay, but it's still right. You see what I'm saying?
Very
And
much so.
I love that you have that opportunity. But let me ask you
Yes.
a kind of a different question about
Sure.
data, because I think data
Mm,
is really important. Obviously, it's really important. But how
yes.
much do you think that people will look at the data and find ways that it's already just going to reinforce what they think anyway, even if it's the opposite of, let's say you and I see the data the exact same way, and it's a positive, we should do this, we should be doing this, we should have done it 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And our colleague over here has never really wanted to do it, but he can find something and he can make that data to him say, you know what, that data
Yeah.
shows that we should not even be thinking about doing this. How
Yeah.
much do you think
Yeah.
that we really look at data in that sense to validate what we're already thinking?
I think people do that all the time because they are interpreting the data according to their own knowledge base,
Mm-hmm.
expertise, and perspective. The question is, if they are working on a team, for example, like I'm talking about, negotiations and deals and projects, if we're all reading the same data because we're trying to complete this project and the objective is it must be done in X number of weeks and it has to be done for X value. So we're all working to the same objective, but each one of us are coming from a different perspective. I think it's important for us to use our expertise and our perspective and our experience to be able to interpret that data. But it's just as important for us to sit around and have that discussion as a team with the
Mm-hmm.
shared goal to say, okay, if you don't understand the data like that and I understand it like this, let's discuss that. Let's debate that because maybe you're going to change my perspective or I'm going to change yours, or we have uncovered a problem that we need to find a solution for. So there's value in people coming with those
Mm-hmm.
different perspectives, but the key is about how we use it and what we're going to do with it, because you can be a difficult person and want to stand in the way, right?
Right.
Or you want to be that person who says, well, that's my expertise and I've seen that problem before and I think the data is telling me this, so I'm flagging it. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm. To me, it's funny, not funny, but just kind of funny
Mm.
in the way that we approach things, and from such a dichotomous perspective, even though
Mm-hmm.
we're all looking at the exact same things,
Absolutely.
but you keep bringing up a word which I love that you use this word. You keep bringing up
Sure.
values, and
Well,
I think obviously that's the core of some things. And when I'm coaching people, I've got these values cards, and before we even start, I get them to figure out what their values are, right? And
yes.
and so everything then becomes based on what their values are. So all of our messaging comes from that. All of our decisions come from on these three core values, whatever they are, and they're different for everybody.
Mm.
And you said in one of our conversations that your foundation in fairness, truth, and helping others, which is your values.
Mm.
How do those early values that you found in law, how do they show up in your coaching and leadership today?
Mm. I think because it makes it, like, personally for me, it just makes it easier for me to figure out whether
Mm-hmm.
someone's the right person for me to work with,
Yeah.
because then, when I have those conversations, the intuition kicks in a lot because I've honed it into such a way that, I can tell or feel if something or someone is not being genuine, as an
Right.
example. But for me to use that to help others, it's really, in some ways, it's really easy to just have that conversation and for them to see it being mirrored back to them in
Right.
some ways,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can believe, oh, okay, she makes it look so easy because she's done that. But it's because, you have to have the awareness to be able to know what you're working with and to constantly make those decisions in line with that. And
Right.
to be able to share when you feel like, oh, that didn't sit right with me. So clearly I've betrayed one of those values. Is it a big thing? Is it a small thing? And how do I bounce back from it?
Right.
So I like to, it sounds like an oversimplification, but I like to make things simple
Right.
when I look at them so that people can understand them better. Because like you were saying earlier, we can all look at the same text and probably get 3 different interpretations,
Right.
yours, mine, and what it might be actually saying.
Yeah. As you're so right. And I think we take the simple things and make them more difficult. And, when we look at, let's take values as an example, our core values are what they are. And if we just fall back on them, I say every decision, if we're falling back on our core values, every decision that we make,
Yes.
it's really easy.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Some people think that tough decisions are tough decisions, but if we, and sometimes maybe they are because they maybe affect other people, but if we're doing them based on our core values, they're really
the decision,
pretty easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I fully agree with you. I think the decision, as in, if let's say it's a yes or a no, that's the easy part based on the values. It's like, if honesty is a core value, is like, should I say that or not? If they've asked me the question, obviously I'm going to say it. However, I think when it becomes difficult or complicated is when we don't like the consequence of that decision,
right,
or the impact of that decision, because it might be a difficult conversation with someone. It may hurt their feelings, or it might not be what they want to hear.
Right.
However, if you don't stay true to yourself, then you tend to betray yourself. Then you've saved their feelings, but what did you do to yourself?
Exactly. Right? And
I'm
working with somebody right now, and their core values are fairness, honesty, and integrity. And I knew him before I started working with him, and I could see there were times that, he would just kind of go along and make decisions because he was afraid of how other people would think and act and these other things. And I've been working with him for a while. I see those core values just coming out, and he's using them, and he's using those terms as he's communicating. And when he's making decisions that maybe he would have done differently before, the people that he's making those decisions with, they're fine with it because those values are coming out of, he's living them. They see it. And they're not taking what he says personal. They're not taking his decisions personal. They're, he's bringing them along with those fairness, honesty, and integrity.
Yeah.
And there's that buy-in. It's that he's living it, and when I pointed that out to him about 2 weeks ago, he said that he sees it too. And now he's got to learn to start taking that next step in, the people that he's leading those people, they need to start seeing that from him as well as the overall leader of the organization.
That's a beautiful story because I think especially for leaders and as higher up as they get into organizations, there's a lot of challenging decisions they have to make. There's a lot of politics, and sometimes they can't be completely honest with their teams or people who are not meant to be privy to that information. But I still think that you don't have to sacrifice, the integrity and the honesty or the core values, but you do have to find creative solutions around these things, how and when you convey a message and what you're conveying to them and saying to them, instead of me telling you something that you're not going to believe or doesn't sound right, I am not privy to give you that information at this stage. And, when it sits better with you and it exudes that confidence that I'm doing the right thing, for example, it shows. It's just like anyone who's super confident about something, even if they get the answer wrong, but they're so confident that they're right. You question whether you're right, even though you know the right answer, right?
Right. And so that kind of leads into this other whole other thought of the difference between confidence and self-belief, and
Yeah.
how self-belief is the real foundation for that transformation. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. And that's something I teach as well and have been working on for a little while. Having done a little research to figure out how to define that to myself and to my clients. And it's exactly what you say. Self-belief is more foundational. You use what you know about your skills and what you've done so far to be able to believe that you have the ability to do this next thing, whatever it might be. For example, my career pivot. I've never been an entrepreneur before, but I chose to do it because I had the self-belief that I could make it work. I could learn, I could practice, I could get people to support me, I could do whatever I needed to be able to move into that new aspect or that new career or that pivot, having never done it before, as opposed to confidence, which is something you learn as a skill that you will practice over time. You'll build the proof, and then you'll be able to say, "Oh, I've practiced that, so I have confidence in public speaking because
Right.
I've done it for so many years," as an example. But self-belief is more than just confidence.
Yeah.
It's an innate or an inherent belief, and it's more a muscle that you got to exercise and build over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do those self-limiting beliefs really kind of invade? They
Mm.
so it's kind of like, I look at it like a disease. It gets in, and it starts sucking all the energy out of you.
Or it's like gaining a few pounds,
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
didn't think you had, and now you're
Uh-huh.
carrying it around with you. So you got to go to the gym and you got to start lifting weights.
Uh-huh.
And it just doesn't fall away like that. It's that consistent working at it, the consistent just doing the reps, just telling yourself and looking for the evidence to say that that's not true and that's not going to hold me back. So, as an example, I'm not good enough to
Mhm.
public speak, as an example, if
Right.
that was something I was telling myself. Yet I've done it many times, and now I've got an opportunity, but it's a really big opportunity. Let's say the example I used earlier, and now it's thousands of people. And it's like, no, but I only speak to small rooms of people. I'm not good enough. Why should I do this? That's not true.
Right.
And so we really have to look for the evidence to prove the contrary and start telling ourselves the opposite so that we can overcome that belief, because we need to figure out where that's coming from and why we're telling ourselves that. Because it might just be a fear of, well, I don't want to do that thing, so I need to protect myself. So that's
Right.
what I'm going to tell myself.
And we mindset shift into that, and it's really just a mindset shift out of that is what we
True.
really need to do, right? Because
Yeah.
think about from a kid's perspective. When they start talking, they don't know, right? They just want to just talk,
Yes.
right? And now as we get older, I'm not saying a word. It's something that we acquire,
Yeah.
and we just got to you
Well,
again
sometimes
have that mindset shift right back out.
yeah, because sometimes we believe the things people tell us, even
Yeah.
if it's not true. They're like, but why would you do that? You're not good at that. Well, I haven't tried yet. I don't know. Maybe
I
I'm
don't know.
not.
Right.
Or maybe I could be.
Right.
Yeah, but I haven't tried yet.
Give it a shot.
Yeah.
So looking back, what was the single biggest mindset shift that allowed you to stop swimming upstream and into this new career path for yourself?
It's funny because sometimes it's the circumstances around you that present itself, the
Yeah.
external factors and the variables that's trying to make you something you're not. And the more stronger your self-belief is, the stronger, the louder, and the firmer your voice is. And when you truly understand yourself and who you are or who you're becoming, that environment almost lets you know that that's not right for you. So are you going to conform, or are you going to choose you and go the other way, which is where you're meant to be? I don't know if that makes much sense right now, but it's really, that's where the answer came to me, or that's how I figured it out, is because I had been cultivating that practice of self-belief. I had been cultivating, the voice, because obviously I went through all of that where I was like, oh, I wanted to say that, but I didn't in
Mhm.
that meeting. Or I felt that I could have been more articulate, or I had an example where, I did say something and it worked, and it was a brilliant solution and everybody loved it. And it's like, oh yeah, that's all it took. And so, when you build that up, and
Mhm.
it's a practice over time, because you just course correct every time. And so it's those little things that gets you to a point where I think it's slow mindset shift,
Yeah.
but it's also a choice.
Yeah.
You get to a point where you're like, oh, if I continue down this path, I'm going to be that person, and I'm going to have to be X, Y, and Z. But I'm not
I'm
that.
not doing that.
And that's not who I want to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm out.
And I think you have a much healthier way of going about than I did. Yeah, because I followed it the whole way. I tried to change everything. Right. I mean, you're and bang your head up against the wall, bang your head up against the wall, bang your head up
Oh yeah.
against the wall, and it when you finally realize that it's, even though you're right, you're wrong,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's nothing that you can do.
Yeah.
You can either conform to that, and like I said, I'm not doing that,
Yeah.
right? Or I'm out.
Yeah.
So, and it
Ah,
is what it is.
you're right. Yeah. No, and I truly believe that it isn't easy. And we probably fight against it for longer
Mhm.
than we think we
Yes.
do.
Mhm.
But life just has a way of letting you know a little louder and a little louder. If you choose not to listen to it, you will struggle a lot, right? Or white people say you will suffer. And then
Yeah.
you wonder why you're suffering, because you stop listening to yourself,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
So we made the decision. That's what's important.
And so, if somebody is listening to this, and they're hearing some of the things that we're going through, and and we know they're feeling the exact same things. We know that they're going through the exact same things.
Yeah.
What's the first step that they should do to begin to realign?
It's really important to know yourself. And so it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's those core values. I think that's a great place to start,
Yeah.
because that's where, and like we spoke about earlier, that's where you filter all your daily decisions through that.
Yeah.
And so, and part of that is also being able to trust your intuition, or that little inner voice, because the times where you feel like something doesn't sit right with you, that's when you need to question it.
Mhm.
That's when you need to stop and say,
Right.
why is that? Is it just something small? Or has it been many small things that has accumulated to be a big thing where you're just
Yeah.
not happy? And now you're reassessing, do I belong in this environment, or should I be doing X, Y, and Z? Or do I do that thing that you're looking at?
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's a simple thing to do, or it's a small thing to do, but it's a very important thing to do, because being honest with yourself is not always easy.
No, it's not. And especially if you've invested, a good portion of your life and your heart into something, and but ultimately, sometimes you have to. If it's
Yeah.
not working, if it's not working, it's not working. It's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for your relationships, professional relationships. Not healthy for your personal relationships, and it's okay to move on and find something that better aligns with who you are and what you actually want to accomplish.
Exactly. It's okay. And you can give yourself permission to at least explore it. And no one says you have to do something right away.
Right.
You can explore the ideas. You can look at how to make changes, or even just little incremental things to make life a little bit better. But coming back to alignment is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And that's so important, because you might come back to alignment and make it work in that situation, that relationship, or that circumstance.
Yeah.
Because all that happened was you sort of lost yourself along the way. And sometimes you just need to put up some boundaries. stop and take some time for yourself. And it's those little things that you lost along the way. But other times it might be, a really loud voice that says, you've got to go.
Right.
And you're like, but I don't know how. And there's people out there to help you do that. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think back to the early part of the conversation, we talk about, diversity of generations, 5 different generations in the workforce. The boomers, that it's one job, one career, one company.
Yes.
I'm an X, and we're kind of torn between the one job, one career, one company, and what some of the millennials and Gen Zers are doing, and it's a Gen Zer, if they're in a position for 2 years, that's a lot.
It's enough.
And it's time to move on and figure out something else. That's. I'm a big believer in you do you. That's good for you.
Yeah.
If that works for you, that's great. But for people, the boomers and the Xers, and even some of the older millennials, it's hard. It's hard because we put a lot of stock in what's everybody going to say. What do you mean?
Yes.
You've been doing that for 20 years. Why would you leave?
Yes.
And
therein lies the problem, right?
Right?
What's someone else going to say?
Exactly.
What do you have to say about it?
It's time to go. I've had enough beating my head up against the wall. I used to tell people I would get called into the principal's office every other week. But it's just me being me.
No, but it's a fair point you make, and I think the world is changing so much that, despite the generational gap, we really have to try to understand where each other's coming from. Like, I can speak to the millennials, but my life has also been very different. Like, I've done many pivots because it was right. The timing was right. It made sense to me. And it didn't make sense to me to be in one place for my entire career.
Right.
And I knew that wasn't going to happen even before I chose what I was going to study. So I think it also comes down to the person and what works for them, because even with the Gen Z, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I tried that and that doesn't work. And I think I want to try this for the next 5 to 6 years. And so, you do you, if that works for you.
Exactly.
Right? But it's all about also being reasonable and practical for being able to do that. It's not about fitting into any kind of mold, because sometimes you don't have the opportunity to stay in a job for 20 years.
Right.
It closes down. They lose money. They change hands. You end up working for a different merged company, for example, and you don't like it. So it's about the circumstance and what works for your life. Sometimes you have to move. You get married to someone and they're like, oh, well, now you have to move to my continent. And I'm like, okay, well, there you go. Something to change.
Time to back up.
There you go. It's life.
Exactly.
But it really comes back to us, right? And what we need and how we can make it work, because it's that thing we were talking about earlier. If we just come back to who we are, what we need, what's those values, how much self-belief you have, that any decision, any circumstance that happens, you should be equipped enough to handle it, because the external variables we can't control.
Right. Absolutely right. Varuschka, this has been gold. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Where can people connect with you to find out what you're doing and work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and my name is in there, Varuschka Nagesar. And you can also find more information about me and reach out to me on my website, which is www.varushkanagesar.com.
And I'll put those links in the show notes too. That way they have it. And again, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Very impactful and lots of value to the listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Be sure to visit speakingwithconfidencepodcast.com to get your free ebook, Top 21 Challenges for Public Speakers and How to Overcome Them. You can also register for the Forming for Public Speaking course. Always remember, your voice has the power to change the world. We'll talk to you next time.